What's up, Calvary Cast? Episode 101. I'm still coming off of the mountaintop that last week's episode was. It's pretty exciting times. I am Graham Parker, and on the couch today is Jess Miller.
Howdy.
He is reclining on...
I feel very relaxed today.
He's doing
with
that
energy from your coffee that you brewed me.
that you ruined with your creamer.
My French vanilla. That's my new podcast name, French Vanilla.
Oh man! And joining us today as well, Andrew Johnson and Rebecca Johnson. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having us.
Rebecca is an audiophile. We found out today.
Not hugely, but a little bit.
A little bit. So you can listen to our podcast after we're done. You're like, that sound quality is terrible. They really should fix that, you know. So, anyway, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here.
Andrew, you've been here before.
Way back.
Way back in the day.
Almost at its conception. Nearly.
You told me that earlier.
Yeah.
What episode was it?
I came in on episode 9.
Wow.
And I started listening to the podcast on episode 8.
Did you listen to the one that you were on?
Yeah. Like 4 times.
Wow. What does that say about you?
That is interesting.
Well-
Tell us more about that.
Well, when I started preaching, I'd do the same thing. And
That's
I'd go
true.
and listen to the recordings over and over and over again. And I'd be like, okay, that's good. That's not. Like, how would I change it?
Right.
Was it actually that good?
Yeah.
Oh, that was really good. Oh, that was really bad. It's just kind of like
It's hard to evaluate yourself in that
Evaluation.
way, though. Is it good or bad? Because when I listen to myself, I think it all sounds bad. So, I don't know.
Graham, I want you to know, from a listener perspective, you sound really good.
Wow. Okay. Rebecca, is this your first podcast you've been on?
Yes.
All right. You've listened to the podcast before, though, because
A
Andrew
little bit.
obviously...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I'll listen in whenever Andrew's listening.
We try to have this trend of having people on our podcast that don't ever listen to it, you know. So don't be afraid of getting a little closer to your microphone.
Okay.
Just, I mean, we can boost you, but you are a very quiet voice, and we got to get as much of that captured as possible.
Okay.
Well, that's all the banter I have for today.
You sure?
I think so.
Okay.
Do we have anything else?
No, I was just making sure you're sure.
Okay, I'm
Once
sure.
you move on from the banter, there's no returning.
I don't have my jingle.
You can't think of something
Wow.
in a few minutes and then want to go back.
I know. Well, we can do anything we want. It's our podcast.
That's true. Oh, by the way, so since your podcast, Andrew, we have had 91 episodes.
Wow.
That's a lot, isn't it? to
It
think
is a
about
lot.
that?
I've listened to all of them.
Yeah.
I've been a faithful
Do you have
listener.
a favorite?
Oh, man.
The one he was on?
I think
He's like, it's all been downhill since then.
boy, I don't know if it's possible to grab a favorite. Like,
Wow. Okay, because they're
That's
all that
hard.
good.
not
They're all that
necessarily.
good. Oh.
But I just think, I remember when you guys finally revamped it and you brought the awesome music. Like, you got a new, entrance music.
Don't forget to talk into your microphone the whole time. Even when you turn your head, you got to keep your lips on that baby.
Okay, I'll kiss it.
Anyway, we revamped the podcast.
Yeah,
a little bit.
And I remember when the new music hit, the few podcasts from that really stood out, and I don't know if it's because of the
It was
content
probably the music.
or more the music, but
Okay. That's cool. That's cool. All right. Well, we have you guys on today because we want to have a little conversation about your lives and the ministry the Lord's called you to, but more so a broader conversation around how God called you to ministry, full-time, vocationally, cross-cultural missions, and then a little bit of your love story, right? We have a little bit of something for everyone today on this episode. So there will be drama. There will
Yes.
be love.
tragedy.
Tragedy.
Wow.
Will there be any
excited about
war? There will be a global pandemic, maybe.
Maybe.
That would kind of count. I don't know. So anyway, Andrew, let's start with you, though, and just tell the listeners a little bit about your background, how the Lord laid on your heart this desire for cross-cultural missions, things like that.
Okay. I guess for me, it was kind of a matter of discipleship. And what I mean by that is my mother and father were missionaries with New Tribes Mission at the time. They've since changed to Ethnos 360. But they were with New Tribes when I was born. And they were raising support to go overseas, and I'm going to get in trouble if I try to say the exact number of months of how old I was before we moved, but it was like
very young.
3 or 4 months after I was born, we went over to the Ivory Coast. And so 4 years there, come back, I settled in Nebraska, and Dad took a pastorate. So really early formative years on the mission field, that played a huge factor. But on top of that, Mom and Dad were really good at making sure we understood that ministry was for the family. It wasn't Dad. Ministry was for every one of us as we were involved with the church at Dick's Bible Church. And Mom was basically the one who was mostly in charge of our homeschooling. Dad did a few Bible classes for us and took us through some French because they spoke French in Ivory Coast and stuff like that. But Mom always picked missionary stories for us to do book reports on. And so it was just inundated with ministry and missions and ministry ideology. And because of that, I grew up loving cross-cultural missions and thinking in my mind, boy, I know I want to go over to do cross-cultural ministry. But the funny thing is, I would look at Dad being a pastor at a small rural church in Nebraska, and I would think, boy, I really don't want to be a pastor. But I love missions, and I want to get into ministry. And of course, once I got to Bible school, because I was like, man, I want to be involved in ministry. Of course I'm going to Bible school. But I got to Bible school and was really confronted with the fact that missions work is pastoral. So you're not gonna not be a pastor and be a missionary. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Okay, so then the Lord obviously puts you on a path, and we don't have to go into all the details of why Ghana and those things because you've kind of detailed some of that in the past and when you're here on Sunday. But I think the big thing would be the transition or the change of plans, right, which happened shortly after you were here back in 2020. So can you talk a little bit about maybe a little bit what you've been doing since you were here 3 years ago? The providence of God is changing your direction a little bit and things like that.
All right. Yeah, no, I was here in June of 2020. I was here the whole month, and I would just want to say it was a time full of blessing. It was really cool getting to know Calvary and interacting with the body. That was a big blessing, and it was like I came off a little bit of I don't know if we'd call it a high.
Sure, you can call it that. But that's what most people think after they've been here for a time. They're like, it's like going to camp every weekend.
Something like that. And I went back to where my home church was in Hot Springs and was camping with my family 4th of July weekend, and the wreck happened. And so all of my plans for the coming years just flew out the window, of course. Pun strictly intended, I suppose. It was a vehicle accident. But looking back at the wreck and what the Lord has done in the meantime, it was, I like to call it a divine appointment, I guess. It wasn't, the Lord was doing something in that wreck. And I think there's always a million things that God's doing in any given circumstance, and we can only see a few of them usually.
Yeah.
But whatever the case was, God was going to receive glory in the fact that I was laid on my back for months.
Yeah, because, I mean, it was a pretty serious wreck. And, I mean, by God's grace, you're alive. And, yeah, you were, like, physically recovering for that, 6 months?
More than that. So when the wreck happened, I had some really bad, I don't know. Do you guys want me to go into any of that stuff? All the bones on the left side of my face from my nose over were fractured.
Yeah.
In my face. My left eye sustained a bunch of muscle damage, and I had a pretty bad concussion. And so I couldn't drive for like 2 months.
Yeah.
I had a pretty bloody face for the longest time. And I think for my brain had a while to get back to an element of normalcy. So I was pretty irritable, and then, of course, not being able to do the things that I love to do, like ministry or, all those things. I don't doubt it. I don't really know, but everyone tells me I was really irritable for the longest time. And I think that was part of the brain trying to figure out what it was doing, part of the recovery and all those things. But yeah, I struggled with what am I doing here now? Because I'm not doing anything, And I think one of the biggest things that the Lord did in my heart during the recovery time, and the recovery time was, there was like a noticeable step forward after 6 months. And that's when I was able to start traveling and visiting, supporting churches again. But about a year after was when it was really, okay, things are maybe not 100% normal, because they are never 100% normal after a brain injury. But as back to normal as you could consider normal. So, but in terms of what the Lord was doing in my walk with Him and my walk with the local church around me, Calvary Baptist in Hot Springs came alongside me that whole time and were so gracious and so kind. Yeah, it was a blessing. But it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, it in your mind. You know it because God's word is laid out in front of you and you can say it all the time.
Right.
But there's something about experiencing something that really makes it, I don't know, palpable or real in your life. Like, and what I'm talking about is, that the Lord doesn't need you.
Yeah.
To do ministry. The Lord doesn't need you. You're not essential for the work of the ministry. And those things. But then when you actually experience being just pulled out of it, and I think there was some pride stuff that the Lord was working through. Like, you know what, Andrew, I don't need you. You're not essential in the work of the ministry. That was one of the things. And I think the tendency in our hearts to know that what the Bible says is true when it says, if the Lord wills, I shall live and do this or that. Like, men make their plans, the Lord establishes
Establishes your steps.
Yeah, establishes your steps. And so those things, and you say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But I think there was a really, I would open the Bible to those passages because I knew that's what was going on. The Lord was redirecting my steps and redirecting, and I would open those passages and I just, I got emotional.
Yeah.
And cry over them and say, I know these things, and then, what's going on here and all those things. But
and all of this too, I mean, it's not just desires that you have, but I mean, you've spent considerable amount of time, training, money, right? Because you're going to go be a pilot.
A lot of money.
Right? You'd moved to Michigan, gone to school, done all of these things, and thousands and thousands of dollars in flight lessons and all of this to happen, and then you have a car accident. Which takes away your ability to fly. And I'm telling part of your story here because
I
know it. But then ultimately, the FAA ruling, like you told us, that you can't fly now. They won't give you a medical certificate. So all that time, we can look at it and say, wow, was that a waste? Right? Like, Lord, why would you allow this to happen after all of this preparation?
Yeah, that was a big deal. And to be honest with you, when it came down to reckoning with, okay, I can't fly anymore.
Yeah.
Medically. What about all this money that's been spent, all this time that's been invested in it? And I know for a fact that none of that was wasted, because God is in the business of doing heart work through all of those things. And who knows what sort of things he was doing through the folks that I ran into or interacted with or had conversations with in all of those places that I was doing flight training or putting in time in the air and all those things. But yeah, that's I never really got emotional about that sort of thing. I was just kind of like, okay, it happened. I was kind of pragmatic. And I never really got emotional about, okay, I can't fly anymore. And then I started going with Rebecca. Once we got married, we started scheduling visiting churches. And we went to a few churches, and it wasn't emotional for me. And then I got to Calvary in Hot Springs, where I'd spent all that time after the wreck. And I started talking about aviation and what the Lord did and the changes that have been made because of it, and I just couldn't hold it together, and I just was like crying. And it was funny to me because I hadn't ever cried about it, and then I got back there where I had gone through most of that stuff, and I was just bawling. But
well, I think what you're saying, I think this is an instructive point for anyone, right? You said something to like, I don't know how the Lord was using me in all of those instances where I'm flying and training, I'm moving to Michigan and all these different things. Like that was that was the Lord's will that you do those things. And in our mind, we have like one will in one direction. I'm going to be a pilot. I'm going to go to Ghana and all those things. And the Lord redirects. And so in our lives, when redirection, or what appears to be redirection from on our parts, is still all sovereignly used of the Lord, all those instances up to it was never wasted. So I think that's instructive for just anyone listening. So, okay, let's you've talked a lot. Let's let your wife talk. She has a much nicer sounding voice than you. So we'll get into, this is the part the ladies have been waiting for here, the love story, in a minute. But Rebecca, could you give us a little bit of your background? Where did you grow up? How'd you come to know the Lord? Things like that.
Okay. Well, so I grew up in Kansas in a town called Inman, a small town in between two other larger towns. And I went to church in Hutchinson, Kansas all of my life. And so I grew up in a Christian home and had a lot of Bible training in school, in Sunday school, at church. So I was pretty inundated with a lot of Bible teaching, which was a huge blessing. So growing up, I would say that I heard the gospel a lot, and I knew it very well as head knowledge. When I was 8 years old, though, and I went to camp for the first time, that was whenever the Lord really got a hold of my heart. And I remember it very pointedly because it was the last night of camp, and they were holding a consecration service for kids to come forward and to dedicate their lives to serving Christ. And I remember the director saying, if you haven't believed in Jesus as your Savior, then this service isn't for you. And, it was right then that, I can just say that the Lord opened my eyes to my own personal need, because I knew that everyone was a sinner, but to say I'm a sinner was that moment. I was like, whoa. It wasn't that just, Jesus died for the whole world. It was Jesus died for me.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's whenever I would really point to it and say that my heart changed, and I can clearly see God's work there in my salvation. Because I remember other times before I would, like pray with my mom for salvation, after doing something bad and just wanting to please her, make her happy.
Mm-hmm.
But that was whenever I was like, okay, no, this is very real. So
How old were you?
I was 8.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So you grow up Christian home, school, all those things. You go to Bible school.
mm-hmm. Yes.
Same school that Andrew and I went to.
Yes.
A couple years after that. So a lot of people like Andrew, right? He's thought about missions since he was a young child. What about you? Was that something like, I want to go into full-time missions, cross-cultural missions sometime?
I would say there was some influence there.
Okay.
Because, I grew up hearing lots of missionary stories and having some of that influence poured in from church, from schooling, from other activities, 5-day clubs. I taught a lot of 5-day clubs and missionary stories, and always found their biographies quite fascinating and quite exciting to see how God used them in ministry. So it was always something that was kind of, there was a spot in my heart for it, but I didn't really I wasn't sure that I was going to be that way.
Right.
Like there was a desire of, if God put that in my life, sure, I'll do that. And I'm sure I would be willing,
right.
But at the same time, it wasn't the path that my life was going to go down.
Right.
Like,
you weren't pursuing that
Yeah.
as a goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of exposure to it, and you're on with the missions thing. Like you're like, yeah, that's absolutely God's design, and cross-cultural missions is cool, but I don't think that's for me necessarily. I don't feel the Lord calling me to that. Okay. So then the Lord brings you two together. Could you tell the people your first impressions of Andrew, the very first time you've ever met him? I think this would
That's scary. That was before the wreck,
So my first interactions and memories of Andrew was when I was at school, and I was a freshman. I think I was a freshman, and going to Calvary Baptist Church, and
Year stamp.
would have been 2015 or 2016.
Okay.
And I remember, honestly, the first memory that I have was of Pastor Matt in the front introducing everyone to Andrew, because he had just gotten back from the School of Missionary Aviation.
Okay.
And he was saying, this is Andrew. He's on his way to the mission field, and ladies, he's single. Like he was doing a whole thing. So I remember being like, okay, well, that's interesting. But then he would be involved in church and teaching and stuff. And I just remember his personality being very intense. It was just kind of, okay, yeah. I do remember thinking at one point, like, that man, he could use a wife, but that would never be me. It's true, though. I really did think that.
Yep.
Because
this is true love story.
Yes, I love it. This is great.
But I was also like 17 years old and stuff, and he was so much older than me, and so.
I asked that question, one, because I think it's humorous, and two, if you're single and looking to get married, you can't write anybody off, right? Because you thought, I would never marry that man. And look here, so first impressions are not always last impressions right there.
And oftentimes when we think something like, I would never marry that guy, you end up marrying that guy or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the way the Lord works.
So, okay, so years go by, really, to just speed us along. Many years go by.
Mm-hmm.
And Andrew just happens to be, tell how you guys actually, like, came together and the Lord opened your eyes to see he needs a wife and I'm the one.
So
that you were being called by the Lord to suffer for the sake of the gospel by marrying Andrew.
So
I thought we were done with the banter. Right? Is that?
No, this is our podcast. We can do whatever we want.
That's right.
So Andrew, his uncle knew my pastor.
Okay.
And so he kind of had some connection to my church there in Kansas. And so he came and presented before he went to Ghana. And then after he
So that had been
back,
in 2019.
Okay.
right. And then after he came back in 2021, after he was recovering from the wreck and everything, and he was going out to churches. So he came to visit our church, met with the missions team.
2021.
I was on the missions team, so we kind of, interacted briefly then. But then it wasn't until May of that year that my church actually took him on for support.
Okay.
And then in June of 2021, my pastor of about 20 years retired. And in the in-between time between an interim coming and my pastor retiring, the church invited Andrew to come and fill pulpit. And so while he was there in the month of July, my family ended up inviting him over for lunch, and we ended up just having a blast with him and having a wonderful time talking to him. And he was going to be in the area for a while, so my family invited him to, if he was ever wanting to just hang out with people, then come on over, because we found out, he likes board games. We like board games. And my dad, he was
really nerdy board games.
Yeah. So my dad, he was single until he was like 30 some. And so he understood kind of the position of just wanting to hang out with someone kind of your own age, kind of your own season of life. And so we ended up having just, an open door for Andrew to come over and hang out. And
I have a sidebar on that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So her church asked me to come fill pulpit in July, and it was only 2 of the 4 Sundays. And it was like alternating. So I would preach, then someone else, then me, someone else. And I was like, boy, that's really inconvenient for me, because I came from 11 hours away. Yeah. Like, that's really inconvenient for me. So I think I'll just stay the whole month of July, and I will invest myself into the life of this church that just took me on for support.
Yeah.
I want to involve myself with the people. That was my desire. And so I did what I could to do that in the month of July. So on one of the off Sundays, her family asked me over, and I was like, okay, this is great. I'm going to be able to be in with the family, because no one else had taken me to their home. Mm-hmm. They had just taken me out or something. So I was like, this is an opportunity. And so we took it, and it was a blast. Like, it was a blast.
And you found a wife out of it, too.
But at that point, you're like, it's just genuinely like hanging out, enjoying one another's company.
Yeah. It was funny, because it was kind of that Sunday that I had the new impression of Andrew.
Yeah.
Because I remembered him being such an intense and just, I only met him in context of like teaching roles or at church very briefly. And he was, normally talking about something he was really into and stuff. And so just meeting him on a very casual level and just being like, oh, wow, we have like, he's really fun. There's a lot more in common that we have that I didn't realize and think about and stuff.
I'll add this too. That's one of the things the rec did was alter some of my intensity.
Yeah.
It lowered it.
Yeah. That's good because before I could only handle you in small doses.
I
Now
know,
it's
right?
a little bit bigger dose I can take.
Yeah, that's right. No, but that's like the wreck. I look back and I say, without the wreck, I wouldn't be married to Rebecca right now.
Yeah.
For 2 reasons. One, it lowered my intensity level. And I mean that 100%. It took me a step back. And also, I was in her area in July for filling pulpit, but then the FAA sent me a letter saying, we can't establish that you meet the requirements to hold a medical. Please go do these medical things. And also, you have 60 days. And it was horrible that they gave me that time frame because you try to schedule a non-medically necessary brain MRI and a neurologist in 60 days.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Wow.
And so I ended up staying because I could get in Wichita, which was like an hour away from where she lives. And I couldn't get in Rapid City, which was my other option. Or I'd have to travel, bucos of distances to try and get this in the 60-day window. And I wasn't able to. So I ended up staying. I filed for an extension, which they gave me. And I ended up staying like 4 months in her area because I could do the medical stuff there.
Yeah.
And that gave me 4 months because of medical stuff with the FAA to interact with Rebecca.
Yeah.
So
That's cool. And so the rest is history, right?
well, we
Yeah,
could go
I
a few
mean-
details. I mean,
Yeah.
they had me over July,
Yeah. So,
what day? 15,
It
14?
doesn't
We don't
matter.
need to know the day, but I mean.
But I asked her out August 23rd.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
And then you
well,
got-
so
It's
in
like
the
a
month
month
of
later,
August,
month and a half.
like we had a few different times of hang out, and we were just really building a friendship, honestly. And there was really no intention on anybody's part, and that was just beautiful, because we were able to just become
Yeah.
friends and enjoy each other's company. And then it was, I would say, it was shortly after your brother got married.
Yeah. Because you guys are at the wedding. Yep.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
went to the wedding
and
together.
some of the interaction that we had during that time, that we both kind of had a realization that it was like, oh wow, okay, maybe I do like him.
I think there's something instructive there too, just in terms of like if you're thinking about dating, if you're in that relation, like just developing a friendship for the sake of a friendship is really helpful. So there's takeaway note. If people are taking notes on the podcast, there's a good one. So you start dating, and then you propose in October this last year. You
No.
got married.
Oh, I thought you were saying we proposed in October. I was like,
No. I don't know when you proposed, but you got married October this last year. So
Yes.
was that 4 months now?
Yeah,
Pretty much,
4
yeah.
months.
Cool. Yeah, so I mean, like a number of things, man, to talk about. Think about the providence of God and how He works in all of these different ways and moves hearts. One other thing, and Rebecca, you can speak to this though. We talked about this the other night, so you can maybe bring this out. What did the Lord do though in your heart as far as missions goes though? Because you are at this direction where you're not thinking missions, right? You'd said that before, and then now you're going to marry a guy who's planning to go to Ghana, right? What does the Lord do in your heart? What's your perspective on that? How does that transition come about where you're willing to go to Ghana?
So I'd say there was different stages.
Yeah.
Because like there was dating. That was a pretty significant thing, I guess, that we talked about a lot when we were dating. And
From day one.
yeah.
Yeah.
You
it's
do
true.
know
Yeah.
I'm a missionary.
Right. It was definitely a topic we discussed a lot. And I remember going through in my mind and saying, like, I do not want to marry him to change anything. Like, I mean, I'm not going to take away from his ministry.
Right.
If I marry him, it's to add to his ministry. It's not to distract him from the work that he is called to by
Right.
God.
You're like thinking, I'll tell him, yeah, Ghana sounds good, but then I have this underhanded goal of like directing him away. Maybe
But by
the
the
Lord wants us
way-
stateside. Yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely did not want to do that because I think it's really sad to see ministries dissolve because, or passions for ministry dissolve just because there might be something else that seems really nice at the time, or so I didn't want to be a distraction from God's will in his life and the direction he believed God was pointing him in. And I guess I kind of just came to peace with the thought that I am marrying a missionary, yes, but I'm marrying a man. I'm marrying someone who's passionate about serving the Lord, which is something that I want to do. And, I could marry someone who's planning to be here stateside, and then the Lord calls us both into ministry elsewhere. And would I be willing to follow in that situation? So why, if I say I'm willing to follow the Lord, I'm willing to serve the Lord wherever he places me, why should I be concerned whenever I meet a man that God is leading me to marry and that I love and he's going to Ghana?
Yeah.
Why should that be a great concern and a deterrent from following the Lord in this?
Yeah, that's really good. Praise the Lord for how he directed in that. Do you guys have anything else that you want to add? Man on the couch, do you have any questions or?
No, I think everything was drawn out really well. And so, yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting to see like bigger picture providence of God and bringing you two together and how God worked even through this, through your accident and that to proven character, I guess. Romans 5, proven character and refinement. And then now you two being married, and that will produce more proven character and refinement as time goes on. It's a wonderful thing. Yeah. So it's a blessing.
Absolutely. Well, we hope for the listeners this has been a helpful conversation as we've considered the providence of God really in Andrew and Rebecca's life. And we're glad to be a part of the ministry the Lord's called you to. And we're glad you've been able to be here in Grand Junction for a little bit of time. So we hope this has been helpful for our listeners. The goal of our podcast is to help our listeners become better students of the Bible and love Jesus more. We always love to hear feedback from you, so you can contact us a number of ways. If you're part of our church, you can come up and talk to us on a Sunday. You can give us a phone call, send us a text. Or if you're outside the church, send us an email at thecalvarycast@gmail.com. We love to get feedback, ideas, things like that for the podcast. At Calvary, we exist for the glory of God, the good of his people, and the Great Commission. So until next time.